Now, it's no secret that China's economy has been really struggling in recent years, and the whole trade war with the United States, well, let's just say that it hasn't been helping. But as a result, many stock market investors have been looking to China, where stock prices have fallen quite a bit, for great deals on amazing companies. But do they realize the risks that they're taking by investing in these Chinese companies? For example, do they know that in many cases, they're not actually buying the Chinese company that they think they're buying, but instead they're buying a shell company that is located like somewhere in the Cayman Islands, and at any moment things could go bad and you could technically end up with stock that is worthless. And that's not just the case with like little like shady Chinese companies. Some of the largest, most popular Chinese stocks and companies out there actually use this structure. So companies like Alibaba, Tencent, Baidu, JD.com, and the list goes on. Well, in today's video, I want to talk to you guys about two very large risks that are associated with investing in Chinese stocks, and those being the weakening Chinese economy that continues to get worse and worse as time goes on, and then the other being the VIE structure that many Chinese companies use in order to sell you stock in a shell company that leaves you with little to no rights as an investor. Granted, I am actually invested in Chinese stocks myself, so I'm not necessarily saying that it's a deal breaker, but I'm fully aware of the risks that I'm taking by investing in Chinese stocks, and I think you should be too. So that's what we're going to cover in today's video. I hope you guys enjoy this. Make sure you hit the like button if you do, and let's go ahead and get started. What's up, everyone? My name is Olive. Welcome back to my world of stocks. All right, so when talking about the dangers of investing in Chinese stocks, it's probably a good idea to start with a little bit of a background on the Chinese economy and explain why it continues to struggle even to this day and why that will likely continue even into the future. And then around halfway through the video, we'll transition to the second risk and I'll explain how VIE structures work and why you should be aware of them. But let's go ahead and start now with the economy. Well, as you probably know, China has long been considered a socialist communist republic, and as a result of poor planning from their central government along with a tyrannical rule, literally tens of millions of people lost their lives from 1959 into the early 60s when the People's Republic of China was officially formed and mass starvation and malnutrition spread across the country. However, contrary to popular belief, China has become much more capitalistic over time, especially since the 1980s, after implementing more free market policies that led to tremendous growth in the economy. Of course, there's still been huge issues of cheap labor, poor working conditions, little to no worker rights, and incredible pollution. And so, as of today, China really has this sort of mixed kind of economy that implements policies from various ideologies. Still, there's no doubt that China's economic growth has been crashing in recent years. If we zoom into growth rates over the past decade, we can see that they dropped from around 14% down to around 6% last year. And that's if you even believe the numbers that come out of China, which most reputable economists don't. Either way, some of the reasons why China has been struggling in recent years, at least in my opinion, and keep in mind there are many reasons for this, but these are just a couple. Well, one reason is that they have an aging population that isn't exactly useful for growing your economy. If we look at their population pyramid, we can see that it's pretty wide in the portion of those aged 45 years or older. On the other hand, take a look at something like the United States. They're much more evenly spaced out. Or even if we look at India, they're very heavy on the bottom and it shrinks the more you go up with age. This makes it much easier to replace your aging workforce and keep the economy growing at a high rate. But going back to China, having an aging population can sometimes be a little bit of a drag on the economy, especially when you're mostly reliant on manufacturing that is best suited for younger workers. In fact, China is the world's largest exporter, producing about a fifth of all global manufacturing. Although to be fair, they do also have a pretty decently large size of sort of mid-aged people with a growing middle class to go right along with it, and that can be very useful in building out a consumer economy, which is what China has been heavily focusing on over the years so that they don't have to rely so heavily on being an export economy. But because China is by far the world's largest exporter, that's ultimately another reason why their economy has been struggling, because because they are so heavily reliant on the global economy, which we all know has been performing very poorly lately, and thus hurting China in the process. In fact, 9 major countries are either in recession or on the brink of one, including big players like Brazil, the United Kingdom, Germany, Italy, and more. In fact, things have been looking so bad that many countries, including Japan, Germany, and France, have even turned to negative interest rates in hopes of saving their economies. Again, because China has this more export focused economy, they're extremely exposed to this weakness, and the result has been that their industrial output growth has dropped to its lowest levels in over 17 years. Meanwhile, the trade war has only made things worse, as even their imports have been mostly stagnant in recent years, which is likely a result of lower consumer and business confidence. In fact, just take a look at how much advertising businesses are struggling in China as a result of other companies not willing to invest in advertising. Baidu is considered the Google of China, and they bring in over 70% of the revenue from advertising. Yet when looking at the past 5 quarters, their advertising growth has dropped from 18% to 10% to 3%, and then it actually declined by 9% in each of the last 2 quarters year over year. That's a very clear sign of business confidence declining in China. And because of all these different factors, the International Monetary Fund is projecting that China's economy will continue to decline for many years well into the future, dropping all the way down to 5.5% growth in 2024. That's not exactly a pretty picture of the future. And so that's ultimately one of the biggest risks that you're taking by investing in Chinese stocks, is the struggling Chinese economy. And it's a real concern. You know, you compare that to investing in the United States, and over here, we're much more of a consumer economy. In fact, Bloomberg points out that consumer spending makes up close to 70% of our economy, which is more than most other countries, including China, where it only makes up 40% by comparison. And that's why we're going through a period in time where you continuously hear people talk about how weak the global economy is, yet here in the United States, you continuously hear people talk about how strong the US economy is and how we continue to push our record-breaking expansion. Granted, that is definitely something that is heavily debated these days, but it's still something that you've probably been hearing of. But for me personally, the Chinese economy slowing down is not really a big enough reason to keep me from investing in Chinese stocks, because I'm really a long-term investor. Now, if I was a short-term investor looking out only in, a matter of months or even just a couple years, then yeah, I would absolutely be worried, because a weakening Chinese economy could absolutely hurt my stocks over the short term. But again, looking over the longer term, I think that eventually the US-China trade war disappears. I think that the global economy improves, and then China, along with fiscal stimulus, will benefit greatly from those different things happening. And I think that their economy will be fine again over the long term. And so I think that all of this weakness right now will in the future have ultimately been a buying opportunity for some great Chinese companies. But still, there is actually one other concern that I am more worried about myself, and that one that I take a lot more seriously, because it's not something that I'm confident will ever disappear, at least not anytime soon. And unlike the economy, there's really no signs, in my opinion, that China wants to fix this problem. And that's the way that companies use a VIE structure in order to list their stocks overseas. And this is something that prevents you from actually owning the company that you want to invest in, and instead owning kind of like a fake version of that company. And if things really turn bad in the future, this is something that leaves you with very little protection as an investor. So let me just quickly explain what a VIE is, how it works, and why it's such a big risk for you to be taking as an investor. Okay, so VIE stands for Variable Interest Entity, and these are pretty much shell companies that are used as part of a modified corporate structure that allows foreign investors like you and me to invest in certain Chinese companies. Now, these are usually located overseas in the Cayman Islands, where companies often go to hide from government jurisdiction, and because they are a shell company, they carry along far fewer rights for the investor, which we will cover in just a second. But why are these even used in the first place? Well, that's because China doesn't actually allow foreign ownership of Chinese companies across several industries. We could speculate as to why that is, but my guess is that their government doesn't want foreign countries to have access to their proprietary technologies and intelligence. Pretty funny considering how China is widely known themselves for stealing the IP of foreign countries or foreign companies, but that's a topic for another day. In any case, the result is that across industries like mining, steel, telecom, internet, and education, it is literally against the Chinese law for foreigners to invest in those Chinese companies. This makes it so that if a Chinese company wants to list overseas, like on the New York Stock Exchange, for example, then they need to find a way of getting around that law so that they can access all of that international funding that they may need. And of course, this is where VIEs come in, acting as a shell company overseas where it is able to funnel your cash as an investor into the actual Chinese company that you want to invest in. And so it sort of acts like a middleman. And in return, these VIEs have contracts in place with those original Chinese companies that entitles them to certain assets or profits from the original company. Well, if these contracts exist, then what exactly is the problem? Well, for starters, it's not like the shell company is some sort of unbiased third-party entity that has your best interests in mind. They're usually controlled by the top management of the original company, meaning that they basically hold all of the rights and dictate exactly what you get as an investor. And the result of that is that us foreign investors have little to no rights, which often includes a lack of voting rights. And so if the original company makes any drastic changes, say to please the communist government or for practically any other corrupt reason, you as an investor may have no say in that. Take, for example, the story of Yahoo and Alibaba. Back in 2010, Alibaba transferred ownership of their extremely valuable subsidiary Alipay over to a company owned by Jack Ma. Well, at that time, Yahoo owned over 40% of Alibaba, and the result was that any Yahoo investors were basically screwed over by losing their ownership of Alipay. Granted, up until recently, Alibaba was receiving nearly 40% of profits from Ant Financial, which is the new owner of Alipay, which they just exchanged for about a third of the company, but it still doesn't change the fact that Alibaba basically screwed over those prior investors and nobody was really able to do anything about it, as Yahoo claimed to have no voice in the matter. Although Alibaba has argued that the decision was made by a board of directors, including one from Yahoo, but it still looks pretty shady to me overall. Now, to my knowledge, the Chinese government has yet to make VIEs either illegal or legal. They just kind of sort of let them happen, and it's heavily debated whether they will ever make them legal or not. But another concern that investors have is that if China was to all of a sudden make VIEs illegal, then we don't really know what would happen to our invested money. My guess is that we would probably lose most of it, but I can't really say for sure. My personal opinion, though, is that it's very unlikely for any of that to happen because it would likely lead to a lot of chaos and maybe even war, depending on how all of it plays out. And of course, it also benefits China greatly from having access to foreign investment and expertise. So it's difficult for me to envision a scenario where China actually wants to ban VIEs unless they have a kind of a better structure to replace it. Still, the real concern, at least for me, is that whether these companies would make any kind of fundamental changes to their company or their business without really caring about how it affects me as an investor. That's something that I'm definitely worried about. And so because of that reason, a lot of VIE stocks actually trade a lot cheaper in the market because investors don't want to pay more for that higher risk. In fact, according to the University of Virginia's Graduate School of Business, VIE stocks usually trade for around a 30% discount to non-VIE companies. That's a pretty big difference, and that just shows you how serious the risk is that Wall Street would demand such a large discount in return for taking that risk. Still, again, it's true that I'm currently invested in Chinese companies myself with growing positions in both Alibaba and Tencent. And the reason why is for reasons that I stated earlier. I think that the current weakness of the economy is leaving pockets of opportunity in certain areas, as long as you're kind of thinking long term, which is obviously what I'm doing. But of course, I am absolutely aware of all of the risks that I'm taking by investing in Chinese stocks, especially VIE structured ones. And I'm also very realistic with myself about the real possibility that I could end up losing a considerable amount of money in Chinese stocks depending on how things play out in the future. I just think that the risk reward ratio is worth it for me, but I'm still very conscious about all of the risks that I'm taking. And while I do still think that diversifying into overseas investments is in general a good idea overall, I'm still kind of sticking with my core belief that the United States really gives me the best investment options for the risk that I'm taking. Now, I know that there's really corruption everywhere, but I just feel like I understand US companies a little bit better. I understand the markets better, the products better, and the people better. And so that's why the majority of my stock portfolio is really focused on US companies rather than anything else. Anyway, I think that just about does it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and if you did, make sure you hit the like button. It really helps support the channel, and keep in mind that all of this is just my opinion. You should always just be making your own decisions and doing your own research. But let me know what you guys think about all the things that we talked about down in the comment section. And if you're someone who has invested in Chinese stocks or you're thinking about investing in them, how do all of these different things that we talked about make you feel? I would love to hear your thoughts down below, and I'll try to respond to as many comments as I can. But anyway, thanks again for all the support. It really means a lot to me, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.